Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the latest webinar by the GIS 101 program that is put forth by the National States Geographic Information Council. My name is Leland Pierce. I'm with the out of the state of New Mexico. I am a member of the board for NSGIC, as well as the chair of the Member Resources Committee, under which we have the GIS 101 program. For those of you who would like to know, GIS 101 is a webinar series presented for non-technical overview of topics within everything that we do. The series was created as a tool for our members and others to use with the many people that we all deal with, so we can benefit from learning more about these very important topics. And this is a big topic. Data preservation is a very big topic, and those of you who are in charge of managing may feel like there is so much to be done about this that you may feel like the best you can do is yell at your staff to take care of metadata and call it good. Well, I'm here to tell you there is hope, and there's hope by people like Denise Bleakley, who's going to be our speaker today. They have been at this. They found strategies to keep moving forward, and Denise is from my state, New Mexico, and I'm proud to introduce her here. She is now retired from a long career in the federal government, and I'll let her talk more as she goes along. But she's been at this for a while, and she's done exemplary work. The Professional Society in New Mexico awarded Denise the Lifetime Achievement Award in 2012. And you don't get that just because you're nice to everybody. You get that because you do good work. And so moving forward, we would like to hear more from you on how NSGIC can help you out. Denise has many ways that she can add on to these discussions. There are others, there are states like Minnesota that are doing a lot of work. We'd be very interested moving forward to hear from you about what we can do with GIS 101 and how NSGIC in general can help moving forward. Bear in mind, this is going to be recorded and this is going to be placed on our website. We have a web page for GIS 101. You can find it under our initiatives tab. So if you forward that on to other people, they can get access to that. We want to get the word out. And so I'm going to call it good here. Thank you, Emily. She just put it in the chat, the link to that page. And I'm going to hand it over to Denise and let her take over talking about data preservation as legacy.
Leland,
Denise?
I'm so sorry. Before you hand it to Denise, just a quick reminder, I'll be monitoring the chat. So if you have questions about Denise's presentation, just put them in there. And when I have a pause, I'll pass them on to Denise. So we have plenty of time for questions. And then also, as Leland mentioned, GIS 101 does a wide variety of presentations. Sometimes it's how to speak to your legislators. Sometimes it's foundational GIS data sets. But Denise, we are planning at least one more, if not a couple more specific to data preservation. So along with questions in the chat, if you have specific topics, either focused on data preservation and or general topics, also please put that in the chat and we'll jot that down as well. Does that sound good, Leland?
Yes, and it should be recognized. Shay Lamar is the chair of the team. She's the one that puts this together, and we want to thank Shay and all the others on that committee. They do great work. So with that, Denise, I'm going to hand it to you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I didn't realize that this was going to be such a popular topic, but maybe I shouldn't have been surprised. This is a version of a talk I gave to the New Mexico Geographic Information Council in 2024 in May, and it's been tweaked a little bit based on comments, and so let's get started. So Emily, can you start the slides, please?
Absolutely. Just one moment.
And I'm going to talk about 30 minutes, maybe 35 minutes, but if you have an urgent need to ask a question, post it in the chat, and maybe we can integrate that into the talk. But if you can hold them to the end, I think it'll be more comprehensive that way. Okay,
Yeah. Sorry, working on it.
Oh, okay. So let me briefly tell you while we're waiting for the slides. Yeah, I worked at Sandia National Laboratories, a Department of Energy national lab for about 30 years and maybe a little less, about maybe 29. But anyways, my first job was to begin the GIS system for the Environmental Restoration Cleanup Program. And then throughout my career, I did stuff related to environmental cleanup, environmental stewardship, national transportation studies, national security studies, and things related to that. And then my first paper on data preservation was in 2002. I wanted to show my boss why we needed to spend some time thinking about data preservation. And at that time, it was more of data archiving. But data archiving is only one step in the data preservation process. So I'll get into that. And then the last part of my career was spent trying to help the people who do the long-term environmental stewardship who have a charter over 75 years or more to maintain enough data to say, hey, this happened at this spot and we did these kinds of tests and we monitored it for this, so that in almost 7 generations, which is like 200 years or more, that there might be some data available. So I spent about 2 years researching and increasing the topic of data preservation. And so let's go ahead and get started. And then please post questions in the chat and we'll move forward. So Emily, go ahead, change the slide. So I'd like to acknowledge that I'd like to thank the New Mexico Geographic Information Council for funding this and encouraging the development of this presentation for a wider audience. Leland's been extremely supportive of this, and same thing with the National States Geographic Information Council. So I want to just thank them very much for their support in all of this work. Next, please. So, you know, we all have data sets that are growing, they're huge, we're very proud that we've maybe collected data for 30 years and that we have this great big data set, but is it going to survive? And the problem is that data preservation is not a given. Even well-curated data can be corrupted, lost, or erased. And I'm here to say that one legacy you can leave your project is a well-managed, well-curated, and well-archived data. Next, please. Have you ever lost track of where you put your files, or couldn't find an important file, or you couldn't retrieve data you swore you archived, or found data that you archived, but it was unreadable or corrupt? Or you archived data and tried to retrieve the data years later, only to discover that it wasn't what you thought it was? So these are all examples of what can happen to digital data during your working career. Now imagine what would happen if your future colleagues needed to access your data 25 years from now. And in my career, 29 years, we had data from the very early years that we couldn't retrieve because it was in original Esri software and there was no way to retrieve it. And then there was later from the middle part of my career where we archived a bunch of data and we did some things differently and we were able to retrieve it 15 years later. So you can do things that will help you preserve your data for the future. Next, please. So there's a lot of myths about digital data. Myth 1, digital data lasts forever. Well, actually, digital data is fragile and very susceptible to decay. This is really true in the era of the big tapes, and much of our early Landsat data was on those big tapes, and they've only been able to retrieve about maybe 50% of that because literally the bits and bytes fell off the magnetic tape. So another myth is copying data to new storage formats. and that preserves the data. Well, that's part of the reality. Copying the data to a new format is part of data preservation, but the contextual metadata and associated files are also needed. So that would be like taking the main file, but nothing else. And so you couldn't interpret the data. Now, another reality is, oh, storage is cheap. We can keep everything. Well, the reality is not everything can or should be saved. And paper is no longer needed to preserve information. And that is one of the biggest myths, because printed copies on acid-free paper with pH-neutral inks can last hundreds and hundreds of years. Some organizations actually are creating paper or microfiche copies of their most valuable records or data because they have discovered that digital data does not preserve well. Next, please. So this is a chart from 1997 about how quickly the data can get lost. So you start at the top, time of publication, and then details about problems with the data or specific items within the collection are lost. They're lost really quickly. And then if there's an accident or something happens or it didn't get copied right or whatever, and suddenly you've lost the data, or a retirement or career change makes access to the scientist's data, your team's data, difficult or very unlikely because they didn't know where the file was, or that they didn't know what the data is or why it was there or why it was collected. And then death of the investigator and subsequent loss of remaining records, it causes, almost certain death of the data. Now, what happens in data archiving is that after a certain period, it's going to be managed by a non-geospatial expert. So you have to be able to give that data enough contextual information that a non-expert can interpret what this data is and why it needs to be preserved. So next, please. Can we actually preserve data for more than 50 years? And the answer is an emphatic no. And the reason is that if you need to preserve the information for a century or longer, it's evident that any system, no matter how well designed or well supported, is destined to become obsolete and unsupportable long before that century mark. How many of you guys have dealt with Esri products over the last, say, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, or in my career, 30 years? My very first taste of Esri products was when it was 3.0. And now what are we up to, 9 or 10 or something like that? And they've changed their formats multiple times. And so in that short period of time, there's been format changes that make previous versions of formats unreadable and unretrievable. However, on a bright note, there are curation activities and preservation steps that make it more likely that geospatial data will survive into the future. Next, please. Now, here's just a context. If we consider a 100-year reference point, archives from the middle 10 to the end of that span will be faced with configuration, curation, format problems. And you need to have links to know that you need to go back. So for an example, you only have to think of stuff that you might have produced in 2009 and then think back, what can you find from 1959 or 1909? How many of us know even where to go find stuff in that time period? So consider your digital files created in 2024. What data from 2024 will be readable in 2054 or 2064? And what data can you find from 1924 or 1904 can you find and use? So that's a way to kind of frame this issue in your head. Next, please. So how can we preserve spatial data for the long term? Well, it's really a series of activities over time and that need to be planned for or at least thought of. So it's for crucial data sets, you create a data package that occurs on many levels. you have to decide and plan for different types of media and storage systems. You have to look at object frameworks and organizational schemes. So, you might be in an environmental cleanup activity now, but in the future, it might be environmental stewardship activity, or it might be just a monitoring activity. So what's going to happen in that change off from active cleanup to monitoring? What about different repositories? Your data might go into your current work group's repository, but then in the future, is it going to go into a larger governmental repository, or is it going to go into a national repository? Different institutions and different policies. So like, for example, you might be a state agency, but your data, because it was worked with federal dollars, actually also has to go into the National Archives. So the National Archives have very specific things that you need to be aware of if you're going to transfer data to them. And then different application communities with very diverse assumptions and interests. So who would have thought during the early Landsat days that data 50 years later was going to be crucial to our current study of climate change? So what happened when they conceived of those sensors has changed dramatically in how the data is being used. So you have no idea in the future how your data is going to be used. So that's another reason why your contextual information is really important. Next, please. Why is it so hard to preserve geospatial data over the long term? Well, for one thing, geospatial data has no uniform data model. It's represented in a variety of data types, vectors and rasters, topological and non-topological, discrete and continuous domains. Just think of data where you're getting data from weather stations 24/7. Those are continuous. Your data set is growing every day, many times a day. So how do you preserve that data? Do you take snapshots? Do you try and log it all? Those are questions. Proprietary formats. Formats are closely tied to specific software systems, which are not always backward compatible. Like, for example, Esri shapefiles, Esri E00 files, Esri geodatabases. All of those things have issues. And if you have data in those original formats, chances are in the future, they may not be able to be read. And we have also multiple granule size. That's one of the unique things about geospatial data. You can go from the very tiny sample on the surface of the Earth to whole planet data. And so you have such big ranges of grain sizes, and they may relate to other sizes. And also you have relational data systems that tie to the geospatial data. And so those are very complex, and they may relate to more than one entity in your geospatial data. So those relationships are hard to preserve. Next, please. Why, again, here's some more. Why is it hard to preserve these geospatial data over the long term? Some more. We have large data sets. We have gigabyte sizes growing to terabytes on a daily basis. It's very common. We have long-lived programs. Some geospatial data sets can be very long-lived, like environmental cleanup data, might have been started in the early 80s, and the program is still going on. And you're still collecting data. Your data set's ever growing. And you have to manage the data from the early days all the way to the present. Extensive context. Capturing enough contextual information around geographic data can be very challenging. And then dynamic data. You have data that's growing and changing every day. You have context for that data. You have processing methods. You have, and you might also have specific platforms that need to be, and that are very product specific. And so that's a context that you have that has to be contained within that information. Next, please. So the question is, what on earth to preserve? So preservation is so much more than making sure you can read a digital file. So it's geospatial data, and it's all about the context of that data. So what do you need to keep? Well, the original raw and reprocessed data, the relevant information, including metadata, documentation to any intermediate processing steps or algorithms, unique analysis of the information, and any scripts that were developed. And you need important calibration or models or input data, instrument design prints, for example, PDFs of maps or other output. One of the most interesting things is how stable PDFs have become. PDFs in the federal government and in the National Archives have turned out to be one of the most stable formats. So if you can get manuals or process steps or whatever, or even maps stored as a PDF or as a snapshot of your system, those are very stable and have they've been proven to have a lifespan of more than 25 years. And so that's a good thing. I had an example of some geologic data, and we made PDF files of the output maps. We made PDF files of everything, and we were able to retrieve them 20 years after their first creation. So that was a win for us. And then other data as required by law, policy, regulation, or agreement. So you might have your geospatial data, but you might need to have sample duplicate data. You might need to have QA/QC data. You might need to have some sort of sign off that the data is accepted by the entity. Those are all pieces of other context that you need to maintain. Next, please. So again, what other issues make it hard to preserve the data? Geospatial data may require extensive product-specific context to interpret and render, making preservation efforts difficult. So just think, in your own daily practice, how many pieces of software do you use? Is it documented anywhere in your team? How many models or modifications do you have to your scripts? And are they documented? Are they noted? Or are they even connected to your data? Or after finishing a project, did you document what softwares you used, any models, any testing, any QA/QC activities, and connect it with that project data? Is it in a format that people can access? And is it connected to the data? Those are all good questions. And those are how you have to start thinking about what your preservation strategy may be. Just thinking about all these like little things. Next, please. So digital preservation is a multi-step process that involves many different elements. Digital preservation will be achieved through digital preservation infrastructure that ensures the data integrity, format, media sustainability, and information security. Next, please. So it's costly to preserve geospatial data. And why is it so costly? Well, you have to know what to migrate, and it requires specific knowledge and subject matter experts, as well as information professionals like your IT department, or if you're lucky to have one, either librarians or data warehouse people. You have to know what to migrate of the data. So you have to migrate to new versions of software and new versions of hardware, and building and maintaining indexes to preserve that archive data. You might have archived it, but unless you have an index to where it's stored or how do you access it, then it becomes lost. So thinking about those indexes and how you're going to maintain them is equally important. The cost of hardware and software to build these spatial data repositories, license agreements in their archiving software, actually thinking about how do we maintain that repository. Those are all costs. Cost to archive maintenance. So you might have a good archive and you might have lots of data in it, but if it's not planned to maintain that archive, people could just pull the plug and say, hey, we don't need that archive anymore. And then essentially your data is dead. So having to plan for and maintain money for maintenance of an archive. And then creating and maintaining FGDC compliant metadata. That's a minimal step. And that's actually a challenging step because the FGDC compliant metadata is not the easiest thing to compile. And even though there's lots of tools out there, it may or may not actually be readable on an FGDC website. You have to do lots of testing, and you have to do lots of making sure that your software that you're using to create it actually produces the format that they can ingest. And if you have any federal dollars flowing into your project, you're supposed to post your data onto an FGDC compliant server. So that's another cost that lots of people don't consider. Next, please. What are some threats to digital data preservation? Well, we have dramatic events such as floods, earthquakes, and political upheaval. Understanding the data, future users may be unable to understand or use the data because of semantics or format, processes, or algorithms, or even just an understanding of what geospatial data is. And the chain of evidence may be lost, and there may be a lack of certainty in the provenance or authenticity. So how many times have you actually got data from another entity and go, do I trust this data? Is this something I want to do, or should I remake it? I mean, it's the same kind of idea. The non-maintainability of essential hardware, software, or support environment. That alone can make your information inaccessible. Access and use restrictions. In the future, there may not be any entity enforcing access restrictions or proper use of data. So that could jeopardize the data. Loss of ability to identify the location of that data. So if you've been maintaining an index or some sort of system to find the data, if you can't find the data in your archive or in your file system, it's as good as lost. It's just like misfiling a book in a library. If you put a book about elements in a book about fabric, you're never going to find it. So it's the same kind of thing. Institutions may cease to exist. The current custodian of the data, whether an organization or project, may cease to exist at some point in the future, and they may not have passed that responsibility of data maintenance or data preservation to a new entity. And then, unfortunately, our institutions can let us down. The ones we may trust to look at after the digital holdings may let us down through budget cuts, data priorities, change in management, change of focus, change of priorities. All of those things can cause the data to be essentially lost. Next, please. So here's a few elements of the data preservation strategy. Having a data lifecycle and planning for data preservation as part of that cradle to grave data planning, that's part of it. And periodic reviews of the data during its life, like thinking, oh, let's review this data in 5 years, 10 years, 25 years. It's just a philosophy of review. Records requirements. Every agency, organization has different requirements for storing records. Some of your data in your data systems may be required by law, and some are, we need this data to help us with this next step of whatever we're doing. So those are very different records requirements. And of course, if you have any money going into your system from the federal government, you're supposed to be able to provide the federal government with copies of your digital data. So data preservation strategy will identify what the records requirements are and who will check on them and who will reposit them and who will store them. So these are just things to think about in your strategy. You have legal aspects like, do you have regulatory requirements such as permits or other federal government requirements, state requirements, local requirements, agency requirements? And a data preservation strategy can address any data ownership and data sharing requirements that allow for periodic archives every 10 plus years, for example. You have to identify those things, those kind of constraints or those kinds of responsibilities into the future. And then financial costs for data preservation can be planned for as part of the data lifecycle. Planning for periodic data refreshing and associated costs, such as republishing to an archive or updating its format or any of that, can be planned for if you do planning on like a 5 or 10 year lifespan. Next, please. What digital preservation is not. Digital preservation is not the same thing as digitization process. There's a lot of confusion that thinking, oh, if we digitize this, it's preserved. Well, that's not the case. And data archiving is not the same as preservation. Archiving is a first step in the preservation, but not the last step. Long-term storage is not the same as preservation. It's just not a storage issue. There's no guarantee that data stored is preserved in such a way that it can be read and understood in the future. When the systems are replaced, tactic knowledge, appropriate software, and documents are often lost. And then preservation is not permanent access. Lots of people are using a DOI, which is a way of identifying places, in storage systems for identifying location of things, whether it's a document, data set, whatever. But those are not preservation things. They're a step or a element, but they're not the final say. Next, please. Key data preservation practices. So storing data in well-supported open formats, use widely adopted standards, bundling the data, metadata, and context information using something like Baggett is an example. There's other tools out there. Store a graphical representation of the data, like a PDF with the data and the metadata bundle. The data should be free from external dependencies. Use persistent identifiers or digital object identifiers. Ensure all information objects are self-contained and independently understandable. Preserve geographic data in a way that non-geospatial specialists can understand. Plan for a technological obsolescence. So you do need to do a media migration every 3 to 5 years and data format migration every 10 to 25 years. And then use the 3-2-1 rule. 3 data copies in at least 2 formats with at least 1 copy stored in a separate secure location. Next slide. So develop file breadcrumbs. With a good data lifecycle plan and good record keeping system, we discovered that despite these things, that data can be lost. So a file plan is one way to periodically leave a breadcrumb in the records file that describes the following: what the geospatial data is, where it's stored, how current is the data, and the status of the data. Those are little breadcrumbs that you might put into a file index pointing to where the data is actually filed. Next, please. So what have we learned about data preservation? Well, it's digital information. Trying to preserve it for at least a century will require a series of handoffs between organizations and things occurring repeatedly at many, many levels. You have different types of media and storage subsystems, different object frameworks and organizational schemes, different repository systems, different institutions and policies, and different diverse application communities. Like I said, you may have collected data for one particular reason, but sometime in the future, they may use it for something entirely different. Next, please. How can you start with data preservation? As a group, you could gradually start a set of best practices is emerging for ensuring digital data continuity into the future. And that includes thinking of a 7th generation. So you want to think at the beginning, how might your data be preserved into the future in 200 years? begin with the end in mind. So for every new project or data set, create a data management plan that includes how you're going to archive the data or how you're going to preserve that data. Start early. Waiting for a task or a report to be completed is too late to preserve some of the critical information needed for the context of that geospatial data. And then data preservation is a team effort. Each team member has a role to play, documenting the data set, regularly backing the data set up, working with records and data managers, working with IT staff for data storage. But each team member, from the person that's developing that data set to the team lead to the program manager, all has a responsibility here. Next slide, please. So this is a list of current resources that have digital data preservation strategies that you can access. The National Archive has a data preservation strategy. Wheaton College Library actually has a great data preservation plan that you could model after. The Oak Ridge National Laboratory Distributed Active Archive, the DAC, they have best practices for data management and preserving and protecting the data for long-term use. The National Digital Data Stewardship Alliance, they've created a chart that has levels of digital data preservation. And the Ecological Informatics, it's a book, 3rd edition, chapter 3, Scientific Data Management, Documentation, Metadata, and Preservation. And even though you might not be an environmental team, you might be transportation or something, that chapter is by far the most concise and clear chapter about what you need to do to preserve your data for the long haul. Next slide, please. I want to say to everyone, keep up the good work. You guys do incredibly important work for your state, for your programs, for whatever. And what we want to do is take all the work you've put in and make it a lasting entity. So the data that you collect, manage, and curate and preserve will be used by future scientists and engineers. You know, again, I've been referring to the early Landsat imagery from the 70s, and it's played a critical role in climate change. So ask yourself, if I were to move on to another job, would my colleagues know where to find and use the data you created? And think about creating your data breadcrumbs. You can start a data preservation practice by documenting the data you create, maintain the metadata, and work with others on your team to back up the data and archive it. And then periodically checking and make sure your index or how you can link to that data if it still works. So those are some easy steps that you can take to keep up the good work and make your data more available to answer or to find in the future. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, any questions? And I want to just say that by working together as a geospatial community, we can preserve these vital geographic data that we've created and managed for our lifetimes for future generations. So is there any questions?
So if people have questions, they can drop them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and come off mute and ask your question. Or if you don't use Zoom a lot, you just want to pop in with your question, that works too. We're pretty laid back.
And I'm typing my email address into the chat box. If you have questions, I'll try my best to get back to you as soon as I can, if I can answer your questions, but we're open here too.
And then something to keep in mind also, so we're already talking about having Denise do at least one other presentation, maybe more. The next one would be, what is a data preservation strategy?
Mm-hmm.
Another possible presentation would be during times of budget cuts, strategies for preserving geospatial data. So Yeah. And
Um,
we'd like to hear from you what you'd like to see.
So Shay, just to comment more on that, I'm currently working on the how to develop a data preservation strategy. And that presentation is in the works, so probably later this summer or early fall. It'll be ready to have a GIS 101, and depending on what people are interested in, there may be another topic a little later.
So let's dive
There
in.
there is a question in there about accessibility. Shay, did you see that one?
Yes. So Denise, you want me to read the question?
Sure.
Yes, I'm going to read it. It's kind of long. If you need a
Okay.
repeat, let me know.
Okay.
I'm curious, this is from Teresa Quill. I'm curious how folks are thinking about the new accessibility requirements for state and federal websites, which also includes repositories and archives. Does anyone have a good tool or resource for making spatial data accessible in an ADA requirements way?
So my first take on that is, yes, that has added a huge set of complexities, because what I found in talking to people, most people didn't realize that if they get any kind of federal dollars involved in their projects, that they were responsible for creating data sets and FGDC compliant metadata that could actually be uploaded to a federal archive. And then to add on top of that, to do ADA requirements where you have to at least consider colorblind people and all that, that adds a layer of complexity that is, I think, is only now being addressed. And I've been looking to the National Archives for guidance on that, because they're ultimately the ones that will create kind of the standard, or the kind of, this is what we're going to accept for your products. And so I figure if you follow what the National Archives is doing, then that's the surest way to know that you're doing it right. That's how I've been addressing those things.
Great. And then I'm going to jump in before we go to the next question. Oh, so Teresa, you're a librarian. So also there are certain states out of the archive realm and purely into the accessibility realm. Minnesota, Colorado have been doing great things with accessible geospatial products. And NSGIC has an accessibility work group, and we are working on developing another GIS 101 webinar that specifically focuses on how to create accessibility. I'm going to let Mark jump in now because he's one of the chairs of that work group. Then we'll bring it back to the other questions. Mark, do you have a quick comment?
Yeah, just pretty much what you just said, which is the accessibility working group is trying to figure out if we can do a GIS 101 on accessibility directly, to try and answer some of those questions. So look for that in the future, and we'll see if we can get that scheduled here pretty quickly. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. So I'm going to jump to the next question from Kevin. Any suggestions on how best to preserve an inherited over 25-year-old SEG-Y without a known CRS? I don't even know what a SEG-Y is, but Denise, take it.
I was going to say the same thing. I have no idea what it is. I'm assuming that it's some kind of
Mark
imagery,
I
Mark,
do. I know the answer to this one. Well, I don't know the answer to it, but I know what a SEG-Y is. You're looking at geophysical data, correct? Or it's going to be downhole geophysical data.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, are you in a geosurvey by any chance?
No, I work at Colorado State University Library, and I often get questions from our archives and special collections, and we have this data that we have to preserve.
So,
okay,
go ahead.
Mark, you can go ahead, and then I'll add on.
Okay. If you can get in touch with your local geological survey, state survey in Colorado, there is a program out there called the National Geologic and Geophysical Data Preservation Program, or NGGDPP. And it's run by the USGS, and it is a specific program for a state survey to be, and for the feds, to be able to get money to do data preservation. And even if you're not able to get money, or even if your state survey isn't willing to get money to preserve those data sets, that program would probably be able to give you the best indication of how to preserve, or what their recommendation is for how to preserve that type of data with the issue that you're having. Okay.
And I was going to, I'm going to say I second Mark on that. However, the United States Geological Survey has a fantastic data management plan website. And if you follow enough links, they actually link to that program of the like sample cores and downhole logging. And they link to a lot of USGS white papers on that topic, and also data management. They actually have a separate data management like link. So I would highly recommend going to the USGS data management plan website and then just follow the links. And I think it's under archiving that the link for that downhole and sample core preservation is located.
Great.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, right now the data is pretty useless.
Right.
Without a coordinate reference system, you have no idea like where it should appear on the planet. And yeah, that helps. I think someone who's familiar with, I think GeoSoft was the software used to create these files, and it just, the software keeps track of the coordinate reference system. It's not saved out as part of the file format, making it pretty useless for preservation.
It's not in the header information in the file itself.
No.
Shocking. It usually is. Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you for your help.
Mary Dupose, sorry, Mary, I probably just destroyed that, has a question I love. To me, deletion or removal of data that you don't need is also an important part of data preservation. When you have temporary files that are in an intermediate step in your data processing, these can get confused with the final product if you're going back to look for files later. Any suggestions for specific resources or advice for cleaning up file repositories and determining what should be kept versus deleted?
Okay, that's an actually very important point. You don't need to keep all your intermediary files, and that's where it gets back to data preservation is not keeping everything, because there's, even though you have lots of stuff, again, documenting the context of those intermediary files, unless they're absolutely crucial to a processing step, does get confusing and you wouldn't know what the heck. So if you've done your data management of your data well, toward the end of your process, that's when you should clean up your all the intermediary files and all the files that were just used in the processing of that. And then you want to just save, especially if you're done with a project, just the end product and anything that leads up to that answer or that thing of that end product. But there's the $64 million question is, what do we keep and what do we get rid of? And it's really specific to your project, and it's very specific to what's needed for your delivery. So there's no really good general guidance, but there is some, like, you can think of, okay, do I really need these, or is this something that's going to be confusing, or why did we have it? So there are guidance out there from the National Archives, but again, goes back to the National Archives guidance for geospatial data is we need the end product, the data that supported that end product, and you're the best ones to recognize what you need to keep and what's necessary. So they kind of defer it back to the people creating the data.
Great answer. Emily, can you go back to slide 12, please? And gosh, Denise, I love working with you. I mean, you always want to work with an archivist or librarian. The slides are numbered. Okay, so my question is going to relate back to slide 12, and then I'm going to ask, okay, then I'm going to have Emily jump to another slide. And this is both a question slightly for Denise, but I think more also for the general audience. I see in the questions, a lot of people are librarians, and that is fantastic. I am a GIS analyst or a manager, or maybe a DBA. While it is my duty to preserve data, if you asked my boss to list my job priorities, data preservation wouldn't even make the list. So I look at this slide 12 and I go, oh, that is a ton of data. And then I go to slide 19. So Emily, will you go to slide 19? Thank you. And I think, okay, what is the open format? Are you talking shapefiles? Because I know a lot of people read that. So like, I personally I want to do this. I think it's important,
Mhm.
but I need the most bang for my buck. I need help. Am I the only geospatial
Oh.
person who would almost like to see hey, here's a best use example. Kansas is really good at doing this, and here's what they did.
So you make excellent points, and that's why I think some of the stuff I presented last year was kind of shocking to a lot of people, because they were just like you. It's data preservation is not my job. That's the librarian's job, or your boss might say. But because you're the subject matter expert, you hold all this contextual data and you hold all of this specialized knowledge about that. And that's where, you know, doing the metadata plus having this other stuff makes a difference, so that when you hand the data off to maybe the, you know, the statewide repository or the library or whatever it is in your program, that you need to be involved at least till it gets there. But the National Archive has a, believe it or not, a 3-page handout on all the different geospatial formats that you can use. And I was going to address that in the preservation strategies presentation I'm going to give. Because the open formats, most people are going to cringe, because the #1 open format that the National Archives uses is the shapefile, but there are some others. There's the GML format and there's the VML format, but that's only primarily for vector data. And that's where the standards come in. You know, what standards are you using for your program? You know, and this is a lot of data management, of just data management for the data management. I mean, I know it's crazy, but realizing that these are things that the GIS teams have to start thinking about, especially as part of a data management plan. I guess you could say that's kind of my retirement project, so to speak, is making GIS people aware that just because you create the data, manage it, make wonderful things out of it, do a great analysis, that doesn't mean your job has stopped. And that we need to open up and include data management and data preservation activities as part of a GIS person's job responsibilities.
Great.
Does that answer your question?
It does, and I will definitely if someone has the link to the resource of the good open source, that'd be great.
I have that. I don't know if I can get it to you before this is over, but I will send it to you.
Yeah, perfect, and we'll share it.
I see that the JSON and GeoJSON question from Jason, and those right now, those are not formats that the National Archives addresses. They address the formats that they're willing to accept about every 5 years. And so I think those may be in the future, but right now they're not considered one of them. But if that is something that your organization is choosing to use, my recommendation is something that you need to document really well, just in case, you know. And that gets back to, what do I need to document? And unfortunately, other than the metadata package that you can create, there's not a whole lot of tools for maintaining this contextual information. And that's why having maybe a data description summary, which would be in the metadata, but talking about that you did everything in JSON and GeoJSON, things like that, those are important. And that's why bundling that with your data and your metadata is important.
Love it. We only have 4 minutes left officially, so I'll ask if anyone has any more questions, please feel free to pipe up. Otherwise, I'll ask Denise to wrap up. But again, please use the chat, or I'll put my email in here as well. Anything that, like, I'm really going to push for a best practices presentation, like from a group that's done it. And then if you're like, hey, I know this group's done a great job. We'd also love to see recommendations of people to be on a panel or to, Denise is obviously an amazing expert, but other people, we'd love to see that as well. And before I pass it back to you, Denise, yes, everyone is saying thank you for a fantastic presentation. You are a knowledge expert and you know how to speak to all levels, and that is a rarity. And we really appreciate your expertise on this.
Well, I'm glad to be of help. And, you know, if you have any, I'll be talking with Shay and Leland about future presentations. So if you have anything, please send it to at least Shay, and then she and I will get together on building more presentations in the future. And I will send her some of these links to at least the National Archives in open format. I love the idea of best practices. I did some best practices for my organization, and I kind of summarized them in this presentation, but in the strategy presentation, I'll allude to some more best practices. But on the slide that had, here's some resources, the Oak Ridge National Laboratories website, they do have some best practices documents for you if you want to access that. If you follow that link to the Oak Ridge National Laboratories Data Archive, they do have best practice documents on there. And I created the PDF of this presentation because I see lots of people are saying, hey, where do I get this? So I think you might be able to contact Shay and she can send out the PDF. No. Okay, I don't know what I need to do.
Contact Shay. I mean, you're welcome to for that, but Emily will share the recording and the PDF with everyone who's registered for this, and it will be on the NSGIC 101 website as well, all in about a week. So, I mean, you are welcome to reach out, but it will go to all of you. And again, thanks, Denise, for creating a PDF as well.
And please pass along to everybody, you don't need to be a NSGIC member to access that video. So we're hoping we could spread the word and get this to your leaders as well. So pass it along.
And also if people have an idea of, hey, this is the kind of thing I need for my managers, you know, let Leland and Shay know, and maybe I can help with that, creating a concise thing of whatever it might be to help you persuade your managers why data management is now part of your job description. I mean, to us, to us here, it's just given, but sometimes managers don't get that. So maybe we just need to create some very powerful bullet points that you can say, hey, this is actually what I do. This has to happen in order for us to maintain our data.
Yep. And again, even this one, as I was watching it, I thought this is something I could share with management on why preservation is important. And now I just need, again, those tips and tricks on how to fit it in the 1 minute I have left each week in my job.
I know how hard that is. And that's what kind of inspired this. So like, how do you do it all? And you can't, and it's just like, okay, here's the things we got to think about, and let's think ways how we can work towards this ideal.
Exactly.
Thank you, everyone. And I look forward to seeing you guys in a future webinar.
Sounds great. Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Bye-bye.